Good afternoon. I'm Joseph Silver from the Savannah chapter of the 100 Black Men of America. And today, as chair of the Higher Education Committee, it is my great honor to bring a panelist of individuals who I would introduce in a few minutes. But today, I want to just let you know that we're going to be presenting to you a set of white papers on education. The Higher Education Committee, has worked over a year in bringing these thoughts together. We put the papers together over 6 months ago, and we've been sharing them with various audiences. And we're excited to have you here today to join in on the discussion. I will introduce the panelists and also their topics in a few minutes, but I just want to right now welcome each of you to the panel and also introduce to you Mr. Frederick Ingram, who will bring you greetings from AFT. Mr. Ingram.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Silver, for having me. On behalf of the American Federation of Teachers, allow me to applaud the 100 Black Men of America Education Committee for this opportunity to listen, to learn, and deepen our work to ensure the success of our next generation headed to college. Our future is in their hands. The AFT is deeply committed to taking actions that will make a difference. We do all that we can to educate, to turn out and protect voters so that we vote for the right people in the mayor's office, the state capitol, and the White House who prioritize higher education. We do the homework to know the issues, solutions, and pathways to success. We get behind and advocate for favorable policies at the local, state, and national level. Most important, we partner with organizations just like you to work together on making a difference. We also engage our members to mentor K-12 students who are interested in continuing their education after high school. We provide support so that they are college ready. We help them prepare for state licensing exams so that they can teach. We provide guidance on student loans before they sign on the dotted line and help our members who carry student loans via our student debt clinic program and our advocacy to cancel student debt. We also work with our higher education members to have a voice on the campus, to address urgent issues impacting their ability to teach so that our students receive the best college education they can. The one common denominator in all of this, from kindergarten to college graduation, is having teachers and faculty members who care about our babies, who look like them, share their culture, their language, foods, and values, who will provide that tough love to push our daughters and sons to do the best and be the best that they can be. And so why do all of this? Because it makes a difference. Students who attend K-12 schools with teachers who look like them are more likely to graduate on time, be referred to advanced placement classes, and less likely to be expelled or suspended. In other words, to graduate from high school college ready instead of on a pathway to low-paying jobs or even worse, jail. But guess what? Just 7% of all teachers in America are Black. Only 2% are Black men. My 100 Black Men of America, we have to do better. We have to do all that we can to get our Black boys into teaching. First, we have to work with our HBCUs to strengthen the work that they do. Today, although HBCUs make up 3% of the country's universities and colleges, they produce 50% of all Black teachers in America. Overall, they graduate 20% of all African Americans with degrees and enroll 10% of all college students. Now that's amazing for HBCUs. In addition, we have to work with our all teacher preparation program so that all future leaders are grounded in culturally responsive pedagogy. Regardless of their race, every teacher should be prepared to teach a dynamically diverse student population. And finally, we have to make college truly affordable and end the burden of student loan debt, which is carried disproportionately by Black people and which disincentivizes careers in public service, including teaching. So I look forward to working with you on this urgent call for more Black men in our classrooms. And I look forward to learning from each of you today. I had a few minutes earlier just on our platform to meet and greet the distinguished gentleman here today. And this is going to be a dynamic panel. Thank you for having me today on behalf of the AFT.
Ms. Ingram, we thank you for partnering with us to bring this webinar together. And we thank the American Federation of Teachers. We look forward to having even more interactions and collaborations with you in the future. Over the last year, as I've indicated, the Higher Education Committee of the 100 Black Men have been tasked with looking at those items that are barriers to our children accessing higher education. And as a committee, we decided that we were going to focus on 4 areas: access and affordability, graduation rates, accountability, and accreditation. We have a distinguished group of young men, and they should give me some pay for that, for saying that word, young man. But they are great in what they do, what they've been doing. They're accomplished in their fields, and today they're going to come to you to discuss these issues. So we have Dr. Johnny Brown, who is a noted educator in the K through 12 sector, but also is an adjunct professor at Lamar University. He's going to be part of the first panel. Dr. Derek Rivera is Vice President for Diversity and Equity and Inclusion and Chief Diversity Officer at LSU. And he's also going to be a part of that first part of the discussion on access and affordability. We also have Dr. Robert Yancey, who is a noted educator and Dean Emeritus from Kennesaw State University in the School of Business, and also a local entrepreneur in the city of Atlanta. He's going to also assist with that particular topic. Then we have Roland Smith, Dr. Roland Smith Jr., who's an associate professor and associate provost, rather, excuse me, and adjunct professor of sociology at Rice University. Roland Smith has been a champion of higher education for many years. The AABHE just recently named a leadership award for him, and we're excited that Dr. Roland Smith is on this panel with us this afternoon. Also, we have Professor Charlie Hardy from Alabama State University, a noted educator. He is a person who has been in this field for quite some time, and he's going to bring to us in a discussion also this evening that I think is going to be very helpful on accountability. Dr. Hardy has been a longtime friend, and I know that he has passion for this particular topic. And then we're going to end with a discussion on accreditation offered by Dr. Joseph Jones, who's president of the Grounding Group. And he's going to help us understand how the accreditation of colleges and universities impact college choice, also the standards that will impact an institution going forward. Now that we have properly introduced each of these distinguished gentlemen, I'm going to ask Dr. Johnny Brown to kick us off. Dr. Brown.
Thank you very much, Dr. Silver. And I'm so delighted to provide a few points on the planning process. It is important to start early in the lives of our children to encourage them to believe in themselves and to think of themselves as bright scholars, intelligent, capable of achieving success in college, and believing that they can afford college. And it's also important, of course, for we adults to believe in ourselves and to make sure that we demonstrate such communicating with our children. So how early is early? What is early in the planning process? Our committee recommends the earlier the better to start planning for college, no later than the middle school years and preferably earlier. Now, there are a lot of factors to think about to make sure that we prepare our students to be successful. One important factor is to make sure that our students do the best they can in their coursework at high school, achieving the best possible grade point average, or GPA. The GPA is one critical factor that colleges and universities consider during the selection process. The higher the GPA, the better chance a student has to be selected. Also, it's important for our students to take as many advanced placement courses while in high school, thereby enabling our students to earn college credits while at the same time building a stronger transcript, high school transcript. In addition, let's make sure we encourage our children to think about career paths, college major, interest, the things that they're really interested in pursuing long before they get into college. How many times have we heard students after they get in college talking about what they would like to do and what they like for their major to be? That's too late. This conversation with our students should occur early enough where by the time they get to high school, they should have a pretty good idea of which areas that they wish to pursue. Let's take advantage of encouraging our students to engage with other human beings, such as counselors and teachers. Here we are celebrating National Teacher Recognition Week and National Teacher Recognition Day today. Speak with our counselors, speak with our teachers to get advice, to discuss college information, to become as well prepared as possible by the time the student actually begins to apply for colleges. Also, it's important for students to review documentation, documents such as from the College Board, and wherever student can get information from. Again, start early in the process, learning about the world of college so that they can be prepared by the time they get there. Our committee also recommends that students volunteer, showing service above self-interest. When college universities look at transcripts, they look at applications, it's really impressive when a student has shown that they have interest in other people and for helping others beyond themselves. That also gives the colleges, universities, an idea that the student, by coming to their college, that's going to be impressive to people in the community, to have students in their school who have shown interest in helping other people. And finally, parents and students, make sure that it's really important to study the testing requirements of every school that the student is interested in pursuing enrollment. Do that again as early as possible in the process. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Riveras, who will continue on this particular topic.
And thank you so much. I want to also bring you greetings on behalf of the American Association of Blacks in Higher Education, which is the premier organization for African Americans as we pursue higher ed. And on this webinar, you actually have three of our board members, myself, who I currently serve as the president of this organization, Dr. Silver, whom you heard from initially, and you'll later hear from Dr. Roland Smith. And so we're glad to be a part of not only the 100 Black men of America, but also the American Association of Blacks in Higher Ed. And so as was mentioned earlier, we're going to talk a little bit now about how you select a college. And one of the things to note is that there are over 4,000 different colleges and universities in the United States. And by the way, there are colleges and universities outside of the U.S. as well. And so as you pick a college, you don't need to limit yourself to the 50 states. There are schools all over this globe. And some of them provide some of the most enriching experiences that you could imagine. For our conversation, we're going to limit it to the domestic institutions, those that are here in the States. And we're going to also talk about in this presentation, what are some of the variables as you select a college? So what does it cost to attend the school? What is the size of the school? How many students are enrolled? Where is it located? What's the student body look like? Is it a diverse student body? Is it a heterogeneous student body or a homogeneous student body? Will I fit in? And that's probably one of the more important questions. But I think as students and parents select colleges, I think the most important variable is what school gives you the best chance for success. And so you can measure success in a lot of different ways, whether it be your academic accomplishments, whether it be what happens to people who graduate from that institution in terms of career options. It could be the quality of one's life. If I go to this college, what will be the quality of life experience that I will will likely receive. So those are ways in which you select colleges, and those variables ought to be carefully considered by both parents and students. And since I know I've got a number of parents on this call, I will tell you, this is an important decision for your son or your daughter. And it should be one that should be reached mutually between parents and children. And it also should be one that has, again, the chances of success for that young person, that where they have the greatest chances for success is a school that you would like to select. Now, I'm going to break up these schools into several different categories. We're going to look at public and private schools. We're going to look at HBCUs and PWIs. We're going to look at in-state and out-of-state. We're going to look at what we call those schools with high academic reputations. But we're not going to today, we're not going to look at schools that are not accredited. We're not going to look at for-profit institutions. We, as a matter of record, the 100 Black Men, we absolutely discourage students from attending any institution that is not accredited. Dr. Silver has written a very popular book that came out last year on the accreditation process. We categorically stand by that. Do not attend an institution that's not accredited. You need not worry because the ones that aren't accredited, they stand out. They're pretty easily recognized. And the ones that are, you'll know those as well. We're also not going to spend time today talking about the community college. While we know that's a solid option and a recommendation for a number of our students, we're going to be talking about four-year colleges in my portion of this presentation. So if we look at the different types of schools, one of the distinctions that we know is pretty obvious, and that's the distinction of either a public college or a private college. That decision is sometimes reduced to a very simple equation. Public schools tend to be less expensive. Private schools tend to be more expensive. It's not a hard and fast rule, because they do have public colleges that charge more for tuition than some private colleges, especially when we look inside of our HBCUs, which we'll talk about in just a minute. The public schools are typically larger. They're state-funded institutions, and their goal is to provide for the public's interest, and that public being that state. Okay, so if you're attending a school that's a public college, the state is driven to support that school, although we who work in public higher education know the state doesn't support us as much as it used to, but the state is supporting those institutions to try and provide jobs and opportunities for its citizens when they graduate, so that they will stay and work in that state. That's what public colleges are there for. They are usually older institutions. They've been around for a long time. They're, as I said, they're usually larger, and they usually have a wealth of programming and opportunities and experiences for you. Private colleges, they tend to be a little bit smaller. As I said before, they tend to be in terms of cost, sometimes they're a bit more expensive, but they're private because they're usually run by, they're always run by a private organization. So it's not part of your tax dollars at work that run these institutions. It's part of a private organization. Many of these schools were founded by religious groups, religious denominations. Some of you are familiar with Jesuit colleges, which is part of the Catholic Church. Some of you are familiar with schools that are founded by the AMEs and the United Methodist Church. They abound, the private colleges, but those typically will offer some sort of connectivity to that private organization, and as such, the rules are slightly different. The rules for state or public schools, as I said before, are relegated by the state. The private colleges their rules are relegated by that private organization, as well as the regional accreditation board that dictates how our colleges and universities are run. If we look at private institutions, they tend to be wealthy institutions. They tend to have deep endowments, and so they often have a long history of wealthy donors that enable them to keep the doors open. They're not relying on public funding extensively, but they also, as I said before, tend to be a little bit more expensive. So think about the cost, public and private. HBCUs and PWIs. We say PWIs, those are predominantly white institutions. HBCUs are historically Black institutions. You heard Mr. Ingram talking about that before. The success rate of these institutions, the HBCUs, is phenomenal. enrolling such a small percentage of those who go to college, and yet producing such a large number of the successful African Americans that we see today. Probably the most noted one of late is our own Vice President, Kamala Harris, who's a product of Howard University. And I point that out because a lot of people say, well, if I go to an HBCU, my chances for success are not as great as if I go to a PWI, and that is simply not the case. Our HBCUs are providing experiences for our students that are life-changing, life-altering, and certainly positioning them to be in the fine places such as our own Vice President. There are about 100, maybe about 105, depending on how you count, historically Black colleges and universities out of the 4,000 plus that we have. About 3,500 that I would call the accredited schools that we recognize. But the HBCUs tend to focus on Black achievement, and that's important. So we're talking here is representation from the Federation of Teachers. We're talking about the American Association of Blacks in Higher Education. We're talking about the 100 Black Men of America. We would be remiss again if we did not celebrate the tremendous accomplishments of the HBCUs. And by the way, Brother Ingram, I saw the pin on your lapel. There are a number of us on this call who are not only products of HBCUs, but folks who have worked at HBCUs. I spent 25 years of my career at Xavier University down in New Orleans. Very, very proud HBCU. Most of these schools, nearly all, are located in the southeastern part of the U.S., and nearly all have rich history and tradition, and a pride that cannot have a price tag on it. And so if you're a graduate of one of these institutions, or I should say this differently, if you meet a graduate of one of these institutions, it won't be long before you know that they graduated from that school. That's that much pride. And it can translate to a lifetime of social capital, to be able to say that I went to this institution, or I went to that institution. There are a number of them. And they vary, much like our PWIs. We also have some other colleges. We're not going to spend a lot of time, but we have what we call the Hispanic serving institutions, which enroll a large number. And I think the number is at least 35% of their enrollment has to be from the Latinx communities. We have our tribal colleges, which is another distinction based on race and ethnicity for our Native American students. But these institutions have more diversity by and large than our public PWIs. So if that's something that you seek, HBCUs are the way to go. As to the PWIs, again, they have largely been more resourced than our HBCUs. And you only need to look at the history of those institutions to understand what that's all about. They are becoming much more diverse in their arrangement, and they are providing a quality educational experience that in many ways mirrors the same type of pride and commitment that our HBCUs see. In-state and out-of-state is another consideration that parents and students will have to consider. A lot of students, I have 4 kids that have finished college, and the desire to get away, when we were all young, regardless of what Pete says, when we were really young, we wanted to get away. We wanted to get far and far away, but that comes with a cost. Many states now have incentive programs, and I'm coming to you from Louisiana, and we have what's known as the TOPS program. Over in Georgia, they have the HOPE program, and these are incentive programs to provide funding for the citizenry, again, to stay in state. And so there are certain cost benefit analysis that you have to do to determine whether or not you can go in-state to school or go out-of-state to school. And lastly, I will talk to you about academic reputation. There are some schools that come to mind almost instantly. Schools like Morehouse, schools like Xavier, schools like Stanford, or maybe Spelman. These schools have high academic reputations, and they typically have long-standing reputations. They're not all PWIs. They're not all public. They're not all private. They're not all located in your state. They abound across this country. And it would be wise, if you're thinking about a school with a strong academic reputation, to do as was advised earlier, make sure that you plan early. There's no way that you're going to get into those kinds of schools if you do not plan early. And so as I wrap up my segment here, I want to encourage you, again, parents and students, as you look for a school, regardless of where you enroll, success is typically only going to be limited by the kinds of mentors that you seek, the kind of resources that are available, the kind of success that has been demonstrated that institution, and the work that you're willing to put in. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Robert Yancey, who's going to talk about affordability.
Thank you, Dr. Rivera. 3 questions that every potential college student asks are, am I likely to be admitted? If admitted, can I afford it? If I can afford it, will I succeed? The answers to these questions are usually subjective and as perceived by the student himself or herself. When they address the question of affordability, many students often say no. I believe that they reach that conclusion as early as ages 12 or 13, that once they conclude that they can't afford college, they may no longer be motivated to try to achieve college eligibility. And they may become average to mediocre students. I think that what drives their negative conclusion regarding financing is that they see those with whom they identify, such as friends and relatives, who stop school after graduating high school. And they hear current conversations from a very early age about the unaffordability of college, so they conclude that this is also to be their fate. That conclusion is just plain wrong. We know that there are opportunities for students to have access to sources of funds through federal loans, such as the Stafford Loan Program, through federal grants, such as the Pell Grant Program. We know that students have access to state support, such as Georgia's HOPE Program and the Zell Miller Scholarship. We also know that institutions frequently will provide financial assistance, which when combined with Pell Grants and modest loans, and perhaps even student work experience, will provide the funds that students need to be able to enroll in school and stay in school through graduation. And this is frankly where the 100 Black Men of America and similarly focused mentoring organizations come in. Our early intervention programs can affirm to students within our target demographic that college is financially affordable to them, and that what will determine the terms of their financial support will be their level of college preparation, as reflected in their grades, test scores, and extracurricular activities, not their socioeconomic conditions. And this relates back to what the 2 previous speakers referenced. If we catch the students early, we let them know that, yes, there is a path to college for you, and your opportunities are improved as your performance in school improves, and we can mentor them and guide them. Then it becomes less of a dilemma to get them financial support that they need. Any student, I should say, who is requesting financial assistance from federal, state, and/or institutional sources is required to complete the FAFSA, the Free Application for Federal Student Aid form. This is a standard form that requires financial institution about the student and the student's parents. And again, as we are counseling and mentoring our students, we should make sure that the parents understand that they are going to need to provide financial information, including income tax returns, as part of the FAFSA application process in order for their students to be able to qualify for federal, state, and/or institutional financial assistance. But once that form is in, then they'll be surprised to find that for many of the private schools, practically 100 of the most elite private schools will provide full tuition and partial fee waivers for students whose household income is less than $150,000. And for those whose household income exceeds $150,000, tuition and fees are increased on a graduated basis. So for virtually all the students in our demographic that the 100 Black Men address, they can go to any of these elite private schools substantially free. but they have to have the GPA, they have to have the test scores and the extracurricular activities involved, which is why they should start early if that's their goal, set their eye on that prize and go for it. In addition to institutional resources, students may also benefit from scholarships offered by religious organizations, fraternities and sororities, and by community service organizations such as the 100 Black Men of America. In the 100 Black Men of Atlanta chapter, for example, our policy is that we will devote a percentage of our revenue, and the number we look at for 2021 is $250,000 to financial assistance for students in our educational programs. So the reality is that the best students can attend elite colleges at modest or zero cost, and that more modestly achieving students should look into in-state colleges, junior colleges, and other more affordable options. But regardless of the option they choose, financial assistance is going to be available so that virtually everyone can go to college or to trade school without taking upon them an unmanageable amount of debt. This concludes my presentation. Dr. Roland B. Smith will now address the topic of graduation rates.
Thank you, Dr. Yancey. I'd like to begin by making sure I'm speaking. I know we have a diverse audience, but I want to speak to the students and the parents on the call and any others who can help them. Although we have made significant progress in increasing graduation rates, African-American students and other underrepresented students still lag behind others. We need to think about this. That's a major challenge. So that's the sobering news. But as has been mentioned by our previous speakers, there's good news here. There's some things that we can do. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about those and dig deeper in some of the things that have been mentioned already. And that is so the idea of increasing student success and graduation rates. And one of the first things, you have to start before school starts, before you get into college. And waiting to the last minute is really the thing that can hurt you the most, because there are mistakes made. You might choose the wrong college because you're hasty and not taking time to examine, number one, what your interests are, what your passions are, what you're good at, and whether or not that college can support you. And so I encourage parents to sit down and talk to students about that. And then the other thing is that sometimes the applications are incomplete, and then there's missing deadlines. That is a killer, of course. So think about those things when you're doing this. So these things actually help us in doing that. The other thing is sometimes students will get advice where advice is not good. And so depending on people who are friends, boyfriends, girlfriends, people, and you talk about, well, this friend of mine went to this school, I think I'll go there. Well, do you know about the school? Do you know what that school has to offer you? How you can fit into that school? So you have to think about those things. There are people, I've had people that do the same thing to me. And so we just need to think about those things and be conscious of those others' opinions. Now, not that they don't count. And as has been mentioned earlier, some students will go far away just to get away from family. And others may want to stay from home because they're still tied to the family very tightly. Those are important ingredients, but those should not be the primary reason for selecting a school. And it's already been mentioned about affordability, so I won't talk about that. But then as you make the transition to thinking about college, going and making that transition from high school, selecting the colleges once you get your acceptances, and making sure that you are ready for that. There's a lot of details in planning for college, getting into college, and then taking advantage of the student support services in college. So the first thing I think it's important to do is to make sure you have information about the institution as much as possible before you get there. Call people, talk to people, visits, campus visits are extremely important. I've had students who actually have written emails to professors that they might be interested in. Some of them may or may not return your call, their email, but some do. So it's important to think about those things, navigating that environment. When you get, one of the things that's important to do is to find out what resources are available on the campus. What kinds of offices that can help you the most, whether it's the student affairs office, health center, career center, I think it's important. And then there are organizations that are important as well. So all of those things, and I think it's not just a matter of finding those organizations or those offices, it's getting to know the people in those places. That is key, getting to know the people, because what you want to do is begin to build your network and connections. And you do that before there's a problem. Don't wait till there's a problem. You introduce yourself before there's a problem. And then, as is mentioned before, extracurricular activities. Research shows that students who are engaged in extracurricular activities have a higher graduation rate. That is key. Now, it doesn't mean that you go overboard and overextend yourself in your activities, but it means you have a good balance. So basically, yes, there are things that are beyond our control when it comes to college admissions and dealing with college graduation rates. However, these are some of the things you can do to control and guide your progress. And in the process, help raise graduation rates for everyone. Thank you. At this time, I'll turn it over to Professor Hardy.
Good evening. It is my pleasure to speak to you at this moment as we continue this conversation. It's been my experience that you get a lot of information, but it's also helpful if we kind of get it processed in a manageable fashion. So in the conversation, I just want to give you a little framework that I think might be helpful in processing what my colleagues have shared with you up to this point. My specific assignment is accountability. And it's been my experience in the world of work, where I've spent 36 years in the business world prior to coming back to education. And I find that the way you handle the information makes a lot of difference. And it begins with organization, teamwork, and communication. Now, in this segment, you have at least 5 entities that you will be dealing with. You have the federal education policymakers, higher education institutions, secondary education institutions, community organizations, and then, of course, the parents and stakeholders. The question, accountability, always begins with a question. What? So what? Now what? Now, as you listen to my colleagues take you through various information, I want you to think about that, because you're going to have to process what you're hearing in order for it to be meaningful to you. It's important that you understand the new conversation that's taking place across America right now, where some corporate executives are saying it's not necessarily important for you to go and get a college education. Well, we know that you can't often take off on sound bites. And to me, that's a sound bite. It has some merit, But I think if you look at the totality of what we are set out to do with the young people who are moving into various careers for the support their families and the like, we're not just talking about getting a job. We're talking about creating a career, and with always an eye on elevation and leadership. And for that, I have the notion that a college degree will always have merit. It's important that you understand, and one of my colleagues mentioned that we're not primarily going to talk about the for-profit colleges, but that has been a downer in some instances where some people have been victimized. So in looking at this whole measure of accountability, you need to have a relationship with these other stakeholders that I mentioned at the federal level, higher education institutions, secondary education institutions, community organizations, and as parents, you need to constantly communicate. It's very important as we talk about higher education that we always keep in perspective that the elevation of a people, the quality of the education has a lot to do with that. And so as a part of the dialogue and the conversation, I'm reminded when my granddaughter was very young and she would just talk. And everybody would say, well, you know, just keep talking. Well, the conversation is that you talk for a while and then you pause and somebody else get to talk. So we really want this to be a conversation. We're going to leave ample time for questions that you may have that you've come to this conference to get. And so we want you to be able to raise your questions, and at the appropriate time, I'm certainly in position to respond in any area that you wish to ask relative to accountability. Accountability is not just a given, it has to be demanded. And so keep in mind the questions that we started out with: what, so what, now what? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hardy, for talking about accountability. It's my job to bring this conversation to a close and to focus on the issue of accreditation. What I want to do in a short amount of time is really talk about the history of accreditation, you know, different types of accreditation, what are some of the standards, and then the process in which accreditation actually unfolds. And then, of course, talk about how people can be involved in the accreditation process, because many people do not know that if you're a community member, if you're a faculty person, or just you can be a part of an accreditation process. But let me try to go through this as fast as I can so that we can have more time to dialogue. So real quick, you know, at the turn of the 20th century, you got to understand that, you know, America was really changing drastically with regards to education. And the need for accreditation basically came out in distinguishing between what was secondary education and primary education and higher education. And so at the turn of the 20th century, you began to start to see people actually ponder and think about, okay, how are we going to make the case that this degree is higher than a high school degree, right? And so that's where accreditation came about. And it actually started out in the private sector. But by mid-century, the government began to start to be involved with this, primarily because of the GI Bill. When you began to start to see a lot of veterans coming back, going to colleges and universities, the government began to start to say, okay, if we're going to be paying for these veterans to get an education, we need to know what type of education they're getting, right? And so the culmination of the whole entire accreditation process basically came with the founding of a whole bureaucracy, right? The U.S. Department of Education as an agency was founded in the 70s, and I don't think a lot of people really understand that. Partly because of the history of the country, that local and state governments control education. The federal government primarily has no role in that. And because of that hands-off approach, the federal government really didn't take the time to really get vested into it. But if we know the history of this country, we know that there were a lot of petitions, right, from the federal government to get involved in issues of education. And one famous case, of course, is the desegregation of education, Brown versus Board, which sought to desegregate institutions of education on a private and at a public in higher education levels. So that's kind of the whole notion behind it. Now, the philosophy behind accreditation is just basically this. It's this process called peer evaluation, right? So in order for an institution to be able to be valid or legitimate, its peers have to come together and say, you meet certain standards and you're able to provide or confer degrees to the students that you are serving. So into the accreditation process, the government doesn't really accreditate colleges. What they really do is give a license to accrediting bodies, and those accrediting bodies bring individuals from other colleges and universities. We're talking about presidents, former presidents, faculty members, just a whole other host of people or the peers to actually go to campuses and make the assessment, right? And so that's kind of the philosophy around accreditation. And there are basically three types of accreditation bodies, right? So there are regional accreditors, there are national accreditors, and then there are specialized and professional accreditors. Now, the highest standard of accreditation is basically the regional accreditors. Most colleges and universities are going to be accredited based on whatever geographical space they're in by a regional body. And some examples of the regional bodies are Southern Association for Colleges and Universities, Higher Learning Commission, the Middle States College Commissions on Higher Education, and of course the Western Association of Schools and Colleges. But also you have what is called national accrediting bodies, right? And these national accrediting bodies are a little bit more specialized, right? And so an example of a national accreditor would be the Association of Biblical Higher Education, right? Or the Commission for Career Schools and Colleges. They're very, very centered on a particular trade or a particular topic or discipline in that area, but is credited on a national level. Then finally, the last very highly specialized accrediting bodies are focused on basically trades. And so the American Bar Association is an accrediting body. American Dental Association is an accrediting body, and they're very, very specialized. So in order for you to become a dentist or to become a lawyer, there are certain things that you have to get. And so we've talked about the history of accreditation. We talked about the purpose and the philosophy. Let's talk about, what are some of the standards with regards to accreditation? What is it that these peers who show up at each one of these colleges and universities look for when they come to do their assessment, right? And so some of the standards are basically government standards. Like every college university has to operate and do certain things in order to get federal funds. One policy is Title IX, right? Another one it's just basic things around non-discrimination clauses and things of that nature, that almost anybody who gets federal funds are going to have to operate and demonstrate that they're actually doing these things. But also the mission of the college is something that accrediting bodies actually look at. If you're saying you're a religious institution, then how does your mission equate to student success? Or how are you demonstrating your commitment to God through curriculum, right? Through student activities. And so the mission is also a very, very important standard that is looked at. Governance is another one, right? How is a governing body at the college functioning? Is the board have policies and procedures? Is there a sense of shared governance between faculty and administrators? Those things are also really looked at. Student success, those things come in the examples of student activities, residential life, trying to make sure that all students who are at these institutions are actually progressing, and whatever activity they're involved in is aligned with their purpose of getting an education. And then quality control, how up to date is your curriculum? Are your faculty up to date? Are they doing professional development stuff? Are they publishing? Those types of things. Institutional effectiveness. Do you have a strategic plan? And then, of course, resource management. How much money do you have to actually do all of these things? And so these are some of the standards that accrediting bodies look for when they come to an institution to try to see if they're operating at the optimal level. Now, the process of accreditation is fairly simple. So I think I'll give a very modern, recent example. Everybody might be familiar with Morris Brown College, and we know that in the last couple of weeks, there was an announcement that Morris Brown College has, after almost 20 years, has gotten reaccredited. Well, they haven't actually quite got reaccredited. They got approved to be a part of the process of accreditation, which is almost as good as being accredited by a national accrediting body. But what Morris Brown is going to have to go through is, they had to submit in an application. Now they're going to have a group of peers come on their campus and do an assessment. And then that peer group is going to go back to the accrediting body, issue a report, and basically say, okay, Morris Brown has met all the criteria for accreditation, or Morris Brown has met half of the criteria, and they need to improve on X, Y, and Z. And then after that, the accrediting body makes a decision if they're going to give them a stamp of approval for 5, 7, or 10 years. And throughout that time, accrediting bodies actually come back just to check in to make sure that they're meeting and keeping those standards. Let me wrap up by just talking a little bit about what you can do as a stakeholder with regards to accreditation. Many people think that accreditation is just something that institutions only deal with. But as a student and as a parent, specifically if you have a child who is, going to college or to a university, most colleges, universities on their websites have public documents that basically show the recent report of what the accrediting body said about all the standards that they have met. You can ask for those, and you can ask for those things as a part of your vetting process for colleges and universities. If your son or daughter is looking to go into a specific discipline, right? Say she wants to major in business, there is a very specific accrediting body for business. And so when you're looking at that college and university, you may want to ask, does the business department also have an accreditation, specialized accreditation for business for their degree? You can also write letters of support, because as colleges, universities are constantly being reaffirmed or even applying for accreditation, one of the things that they do is they ask the community to write letters of support on behalf of the institution. So as a student, as a parent, you can do those kind of things. College officials, those who work at colleges and universities, you can become a peer reviewer, which is significantly important. Because that peer reviewer, by becoming a peer reviewer, you actually go to different colleges, universities, and begin to start to assess those institutions and become a part of the validation process of making sure that other colleges and universities are operating at an optimal level. And we need more African Americans, specifically African Americans who are at HBCUs, to become peer reviewers, because that is a very important part of the accreditation process. But also, faculty, staff people, building a culture of an assessment on their campus, attending the annual conference. Every accrediting body has an annual conference. So going to those conferences, learning about new policies and things that are happening that may impact where you work is also very, very important. And then, of course, just participating in the reaffirmation process. And then finally, community members can also write letters of support or make comments on colleges and universities. a lot of times when big universities and some private, when they're doing searches for presidents or vice presidents, they may ask community members to come and serve on the search committee. That's a very, very important part of the accrediting process too, because it says that you're valuing the stakeholders of not only just people inside of your campus, but outside. So volunteering to do those kind of things are also very, very important. And then of course, partnering with a college and university, if you have a nonprofit or a corporation, actually helps to beef up the accreditation standard of an institution. So overall, accreditation is one of the most important things for colleges, universities. I look forward to any questions or comments, and I'll turn it back over to Dr. Silver.
Well, thank you, Dr. Jones. I want to say thank you to Professor Hardy, to Dr. Roland Smith, Dr. Yancey, Dr. Roveris, and Dr. Brown, and Dr. Ingram, Mr. Ingram. We've had a very lively discussion. Now we want to open this panel up for questions. If you have a question, please put it in the chat and we will respond to your questions. And we're hoping that this phase of the program can really address the specific concerns that you have. And so while I am waiting for questions to come into the chat, I'm going to ask the panel to respond to a few questions that I have. And the first one is going to be around access. When you think about access and you think about the college prep curriculum, can someone on this panel talk about what that is? What is the college prep curriculum? And why is it important in terms of getting kids started early in on that process?
I'll go ahead and speak to that, Dr. Silver. And I think you heard from Dr. Brown about the importance of starting early. There is no substitution for early preparation. As a matter of fact, the lack of early preparation will eliminate many students from a number of majors. And so college prep and what does that look like starts as early as you could possibly get it started. We know that there's the analogy of the prisons being built based upon third and fourth grade matriculation. So we know we don't have a kid go from third to fourth grade. That tells the state how many beds we're going to need 10 years from now. We should have the same kind of planning for college. Third graders should be well equipped to move on to fourth grade, and fourth graders on to fifth. High school kids should be well equipped to move on to any college curriculum that they so choose. There are science curriculums in college that if you do not have the requisite science courses in your high school transcript, you will not be able to be admitted into that until you earn those courses, which adds to the length of time of going to college. So the answer to your question in terms of college preparation, it must start early. It should be advised. It should not be, and it should be informed advising. It should not be, as we used to say back at Xavier, the sidewalk advisors. You know, on the sidewalk, you got all kind of good advice, but they on the 6-year plan to graduation, right? No, it should be those people who know what it takes to get you through to prepare you as a high school student for the college experience. And lastly, I'll say it is entirely okay. It is entirely okay if you prepare for one career and get to college and find out that that's not the career for you. I think there are a lot of folks. Another analogy is climbing the ladder of success, getting to the top and realize your ladder is leaning on the wrong building. There are a lot of people who you know, they said, you know, well, I was going to college so I could be an engineer, and I'm going to be an engineer. And they get there and they don't even like it, and that's not good. And so I'd be remiss if I did not say it is entirely okay as you do your preparation if when you get to college, because a lot of times there are careers out there that you just didn't know about. And that's part of the beauty of college, is that you might find something that is more suited to your interests and your abilities.
Okay, can someone speak to the actual courses that that students should be taking in that college prep? I think Dr. Brown wants to talk about that.
Yes, I would like to add something in that regard. And thanks, Dr. Rivera. I was just thinking about the ladders that I've been on. I think that the ladders I've been on have leaned toward the right buildings, but that's something to think about, sir. Thank you for sharing. but I would just suggest, really push, not just suggest, that every student who is in earshot of our voices takes at least 4 years of English, math, social studies, and science. And I know that in some states, they require only 3 units of science. In some states, they don't necessarily require 4 years of mathematics. But I think a student is really on a more of a solid foundation by taking 4 years of each, English, math, social studies, science. And of course, in that social studies, it should include U.S. history, as well as government and economics. But also, I would encourage at least 1 unit of physical education, band or ROTC, a year of computer science, 1 to 2 years of foreign languages, and also electives in the form of fine arts, art, music, dance, theater. In terms of being well-rounded, students who are best prepared, my observations would say that they've been strong to take at least a minimum of those courses that I've mentioned.
Thank you so very much. And so then it means that they should begin thinking about that at the middle school,
Or earlier.
Or earlier, because if you can't, the courses that you named at that 9th grade year is going to be very critical, and they must have the prerequisites to take those math courses. So that means that the 1 through 6 is going to be very critical. It's a building block.
Yes.
So we want folks to be prepared for that. So let me ask you this then. Oh, yes, sir, Dr. Smith. I see you have your hands raised.
You're on mute.
You're on mute, Dr. Smith.
I have done some informal surveys of colleagues of mine, particularly non-minority, who are in the STEM fields. And almost all of them say that they got their start in elementary school, late, 5th grade, 6th grade, in their interest. So it's important to do that early. And I know that it may not be for everyone, but that's the first point. The second point is, it's important to develop a plan. But plans are made for change. So that if you know, and college is a place for exploration, but you have to be strategic about your exploration. And so it's a matter of finding out what you want to do, and it's okay. I've had students that come to me, come in and say, I'm going to be an engineer, or I'm going to be a doctor. And they take that course, and they say, no, this is not what I want to do. But what I found out was, it wasn't that they wanted to do it. It was that their parents wanted them to do it. And so there was this disconnect. So we have to kind of make sure that families kind of address that issue as well.
Yeah.
And that, that's kind of what I was sharing in my presentation. This ought to be a shared decision, not just the student's decision, not just the parent's decision, but a shared decision, and an informed decision. And I tend to lean, as I said before, I had 4 kids. They went in 3 different directions as far as college was concerned. I tend to lean on the heart of the kid. What is the kid's heart trying to say? There's no point in trying to force a kid as a parent into a college that they don't want to be at, or that they don't feel like they're going to be successful at. Just because I don't have enough money to pay for school A or school B, so I'm going to make you go to the one that I can afford. That might be, you might be doing yourself more harm than good. But please make that a combined decision that the parents and the student reach together. And I guarantee you, you'll have better outcomes if the student is happy at the institution that she chooses.
I think that's a valid point. Professor Hardy?
Yeah, I'd just like to add the fact that this is a good time to plug our mentoring, the significance when you're dropping back in terms of helping students to determine some direction they want to take in their lives. You have people in the community who are good role models. I find that many times we are not utilizing what's available to us, bring those people into the circle, because in some instances, we're losing ground with some professions if we don't get the pipeline loaded up the way it ought to be. So I think that this is a good opportunity for parents to consider that, you're working on your own future.
Yeah.
So we talked about earlier the importance of the right courses and the right grades. And let's say that in this microcosm of the world, all these students have good grades and they have taken the right courses. What are some other things they should be doing and some other things they should bring to the table to get the admissions counselor's attention to get into these schools? Yes, Dr. Smith and Dr. Yancey, I see.
So yeah, I think getting involved in the community or in the school, and it's not a matter of joining organizations. Some students will come in with a list of a page long of organizations they belong to. What colleges look for are students who are actually doing something with those organizations, making an impact. We call them impact students, difference makers, bridge builders. Those are the kinds of things that ought to be connected to those activities, so that there's, you've had students had built, started something with a homeless shelter, or does something with their church or in their neighborhood, or even in the school, created something that made the school more inclusive. Those kinds of things.
Dr. Yancey and then Dr. Brown.
I'll wait, sure.
Yeah. In addition to extracurricular activities where students should be involved and preferably a leadership role, it's also important, where possible, for students to have a broader breadth of experience. So if students are able to take vacations to places in the United States, for example, to Yellowstone National Park, or to some historic places, to Williamsburg, Virginia, to Niagara Falls. Of course, if they're able to travel abroad to Europe or to Africa, to Asia, and to put that information into their applications, then this reflects a student who has a broader experience, and universities are looking for students who are looking for diversity, and diversity is not just about race and color and sexual preference and those kinds. Diversity is about what have you done, what have you seen, where have you gone, So the more different and variety of experiences that a student can have, both at school and away from school in his personal life, the higher the likelihood that student will be attractive to highly selective institutions.
Okay, we're going to ask Dr. Brown to speak, and then I'm going to ask Dr. Jones to weigh in on that question too.
Sure. Just I mentioned earlier the importance of having students participate in volunteer situations, helping at their churches or in the community, but also not just do something out there, do some things that are meaningful, and record the hours that the student is volunteering. So often you look at scholarship applications and they skip that question of civic or volunteer organizations that they've worked in. But not only do the work, but also record the hours and get somebody to sign off on it, I think is attractive. But also, I mentioned earlier, a child should believe in himself and be encouraged to think of themselves as scholars. So often our students don't have confidence that they can do the work. But I'm confident that I really believe that every child is a scholar in his or her own right and can do the work. And added to that, finally, read. A child or an adult can not ever read enough. You ask an adult just walking down the street, how many books have you read lately? And depending on, now watch this, depending on what neighborhood you're in, I won't even finish that comment.
Okay, Dr. Jones and then Dr. Roberts.
You got the point.
Yeah, I want to answer that question in a different kind of way, because as I've been listening to the conversation unfold, we're talking. I mean, there are some assumptions that are being held about these students who are applying for these colleges, universities, and so these are high performing students. These are students who are, who are doing all the things in order to get to meet all those marks. But then we know there are other sets of students, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Who don't who don't have anybody to kind of coach them up, but still may want to go to college, right? And so, you know, as I'm thinking about that, it may not have it's not so much as, is this institution going to choose me? It's rather, is this institution going to take a risk on me, right, to be able to come in and to be able to prove that I am college worthy, right? And so a little piece of advice for those type of students, you know, when you go to a college, or specifically, let me just be very clear about HBCUs, because I think for me, and I'm just talking from my experience, one of the most important factors for my success was that I had really good professors, right? Mm-hmm. Professors who were brutally honest with me, right? Yep. Who and was very intentional about making sure I didn't cut any corners, and that I was doing everything I could to be successful, right? And so having really, really good professors and making sure that the college you go to has a professor in a major that's going to be patient with you, that's going to be honest with you, I think is just as golden, right? Yes. As anything else that we've been talking about. And so students who are going and looking at colleges, talking to students on the campus, because students will know who the good professors are and who aren't. But that is something I think that ought to be part of us providing some of this, you know, advice. Because I mean, and I'm sure each one of you gentlemen can name a professor that, you know, changed your life, right? Yes. That sets you on a path. Because I know me coming out of high school, I was not prepared for college. But when I got to my HBCU, I had professors kicking me in my butt, getting me to where I needed to be. And if I didn't have that, then I know I wouldn't be successful today. So
before we go to Dr. Rivera, he had a comment. I wanted to encourage our audience to put any questions that you have in the chat. These distinguished gentlemen are chopping at the bit to hear from you and to answer your questions. So, Dr. Rivera, as we're looking for the audience questions.
One of the pieces, and as you described it, Dr. Silver, you know, you've got this very talented student. They've done all the courses that Dr. Brown articulated, and they're ready for college. One of the things that has changed, and no one's mentioned this yet, is the holistic admissions process.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And the holistic admissions process is one that everyone should get familiar with. We didn't talk about it specifically in our white paper, at least I don't think we did. But it is a process by which colleges and universities are looking at more than the two big variables. You know what the two big variables are, the GPA and the SAT or ACT score. Well, now we're looking at a holistic picture of a student. And so the suggestions that were offered earlier about volunteering and documenting your experiences, those are good. But I will give you one that is that you can't get past, and that's the essay. As we look at holistic admissions, students are required to write an essay. And so what Brother Brown was telling you to read, you can't write if you can't read.
Gentlemen, we have a question from one of our participants, and let's go to that participant. The participant wants to know, how can someone who is a junior in high school get volunteer hours at this point?
I mean, I will. If you're a junior in high school, you're going to be applying for college next fall, and so you're going to have to spend this summer volunteering. You're going to have to spend the beginning of the fall volunteering and get those hours in. But I can tell you, as I was saying, more important than a whole list of volunteer hours is a strong essay. So while you're thinking about volunteering, that's not the magic ticket. The magic ticket is a strong, solid essay. So in addition to reading, get some writing in.
And that essay, so in the essay should talk about the impact of your volunteering.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And let me also say to that young lady, I believe, yes. I would sit down with somebody, because in our community, a lot of times we're told to do things we don't even know we're volunteering. Be in churches. So I would do an audit of your life and talk with people and say, was I volunteering when I was at church? Was I volunteering when we were doing, there are ways to be able to build that based on your own life experience. Because I just refuse to believe that you've gone your whole entire life and not have done nothing, in service of somebody. So, just take the time to really think through about what you've done already.
And maybe we can direct her to where her circles of activities are right now,
Right.
whether it's the church or whether it's a community or whether it's a group of hospitals or what have you. And you don't have to wait till you see a sign to say volunteers sign up here. You go in and present yourself and say, I want to volunteer, I want to serve. And they will make that happen. They will make it happen. So one of the things I want to ask, let's say that we take, for an example, the question and that student that Dr. Jones talked about. And then we also take that students that some of the other panel members were talking about who are destined for success. Then all of a sudden they get on campus and they struggle academically.
Right.
Let's have a conversation about why that occurs. Why is it that people lose their Hope scholarships? Why is it communities back students with great GPAs and then something happened that first year? Let's talk about that, gentlemen.
Yeah.
Let me try.
Dr. Yancey has his hand up, and we'll go to then to Roland, Dr. Smith, and then Professor Hardy in that order.
I want to address this because I worked at a university where the priority on student housing was that students who had dormitory rooms kept their dormitory rooms until they terminated, either graduated or left school. And because there was a dearth of student housing, frequently freshmen and even sophomores were unable to have access to student housing. It is clear to me, after having spent 40 years on various college and university campuses, that the first year experience for college students is the most difficult and the most traumatic for most college students, because they're leaving home as young adults, 16, sometimes 17, 18, 19 years old. This is their first time away from home, away from parental type supervision. And I think that they, whether they realize it or not, they need more structure in their lives. And where universities, and this goes back to the HBCU WI, because the HBCUs typically provide much more structure for students. They require sometimes freshmen, for example. When I went to college, if you were a freshman, you were required to live on campus, even if you had a residence in town, because they want to have an opportunity to expose you to an academic environment, to a structured environment, to expose you to other people who are studying and getting work done. And this is sort of the alma mater, the mother surrogate function that colleges used to serve. Many of them still do. A lot of them don't do that anymore.
Okay.
So providing some structure for students during their first year helps to ground them and orient them to the college experience, which they can later on navigate on their own.
Dr. Smith, Dr. Hardy, then we have a question in the chat. So,
yes,
shorten your answer so we can get to the chat, okay?
Okay. So I think that one of the things that top students, particularly if they're an underrepresented population student, they're the top student in their school. They get to college, they're no longer the top dog, right? So they have to kind of readjust that. That's one area. Then there's the other issue is that there's a mismatch of school, because maybe somewhere along the line, you know, they were so bent on this school because they were at the top of their class. They had all this going for them, and they wanted to see that shining citadel on the hill, that school that everybody talks about, but that school was not a good fit. And so that's another issue. And then there's the final one, I think, is not final, but another one is, as I mentioned earlier, there are times when students go to schools based on what they've heard from people who are not necessarily having their best interest in heart.
Okay, Professor Hardy, then we're going to go to the chat.
Yeah, what I've found is that the fact that our students are not really readers. You know, one of the things that I tell students, readers are leaders. If you fail to read, what you need to know will come and go, and you will never know. They do not want to read. I get calls all the time about with this. its own blackboard has been posted. Read. They do not develop habits in reading. And I think that's a fundamental that needs to be punctuated prior to coming to college. And I would say again, in our mentoring and our support, that's something we can do as a preemptive strike, so to speak, and putting the significance in being great readers.
Well, there's a question in the chat. I want to know if you have any references, any good books or websites that you can refer the audience to in terms of guiding students through the college preparation process.
I'm going to take a shot at that one, Dr. Silver, and that is—
Okay, please do, and then Dr. Brown's going to follow you. He raised his hand.
Oh, okay. And if you get a chance, check out our white paper. That's what we're speaking from. That's a pretty good source, available at the 100 Black Men of America. I would also recommend one that we use a lot at Xavier, and that was the Uncf Readiness Toolkit. United Negro College Fund, the Readiness Toolkit. That College Readiness Toolkit. That organization is designed to provide access for the same people we're talking about today. And so I highly recommend them. And then there are a whole bunch of websites that you can go to. But it really comes down to a lot of what we've been talking about tonight. A lot of what we've been talking about tonight is preparing early, making it a broad preparation, not just the grades and a couple of test scores. And then it will come down to the type of school that you or your son or daughter is looking for. So I guess the best answer is preparing early and doing that research that your question speaks to.
Okay, Dr. Brown, and then if there's another question in the chat, we'll go back to the chat.
Yes, I would first reiterate what Dr. Rivera just said. In the white paper, there are references that would, I think, be useful for the person asking the question to look at. And more specifically, and in particular, the College Board, which has all kind of information on college readiness, the collegeboard.org, but also the ACT organization, www.act.org, has solutions for college and career readiness information that I think would be useful as well.
Okay, gentlemen, we have about 7 minutes, less than 7 minutes, about 5 minutes left. So what I want you to do, if you would, take 1 minute to talk about what your chapter record. First of all, identify the chapter that you belong to, and then tell one thing that your chapter is doing to facilitate high school to college. Why don't we start with Dr. Yancey? They got a good thing going on in Atlanta with Project Success.
Yeah, well, the history of Project Success at the 100 Black Men of Atlanta is that we started 39 or so years ago with the 9th grade classroom that we picked essentially arbitrarily at the lowest performing public school in Atlanta. And we told the kids in that classroom that if you finish high school, we're going to pay the cost for attending college. The kids kind of yawned and didn't pay as much attention. We discovered we couldn't just say that. A whole lot of black men had come to them and made promises before that they probably didn't keep in their lifetime. We had to get involved in their lives, get involved in their education. We actually brought staff into the school and worked with them and helped them one-on-one and mentoring. And 39 years later, we're doing the same kinds of things. We have Saturday Academy where we prepare kids for ACT and GMAT, the ACT and the SAT exams.
SAT. Mm-hmm.
And we have classes where we prepare kids for math, science, technology, and engineering. We have classes where we prepare kids for leadership and business. So we have a pretty comprehensive curriculum of services we offer to kids. We aren't trying to substitute for the teachers. We're trying to supplement what the teachers do to make them better prepared to make good decisions for college.
Very good. Dr. Rivera, what chapter are you in and what are you all doing?
a part of the 100 Black Men of Metro Baton Rouge, and we do we do all of the national programs, so Project Excel and the mentoring aspects of that. But one that I'm really proud of is a middle school robotics camp that we do in the summer. And it gets to STEM disciplines, so science, technology, engineering, and math, as well as a little bit of the art. So we sometimes call it STEAM. That program exposes kids, many who come from schools where they don't have sufficient science laboratories or science curriculum in the summer, and they actually compete in robotics competitions and get real excited about STEM, so that they can, from middle school, be propelled into high school, and from high school on into college.
Thank you so very much. Dr. Roland Smith, where are you? What is your chapter, and what are some of the things you all are doing locally?
We're the 100 Black Men of Metropolitan Houston, and we do a lot of the things you've just been mentioned. We have weekly Saturday meetings where we have, some of them are at different campuses in the Houston area. We have one of our members is a pilot. So we've had some things with that. We've done things with getting the young men exposed to those things. We're taking advantage of the medical center and the arts and all the universities in the city.
Thank you. Dr. Jones, your chapter, and what are you doing?
Yes, my chapter is the Greater Little Rock chapter in Little Rock, Arkansas. We do a couple of things with our gentlemen. We have an 8-week Smart Academy where for 8 weeks, every Saturday, we essentially teach specifically those who are 16 and up the importance of colleges. And we actually take our students to local HBCUs like UAPB, Philander Smith College, Shorter College, and even some PWIs like Hendrix College, University of Central Arkansas. And since we do have college professors in our chapter, we also talk with them and assist them in actually, filling out the FAFSA and things of that nature. So we're really very hands-on.
Very good. Professor Hardy, what are you doing? Where are you from? You're on mute, Professor Hardy. There you go.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah, we're the Greater Auburn, Tuskegee, Opelika chapter, and we have a full range of mentoring support for our students from those 3 areas.
Very good. Dr. Brown.
Yes, sir. We are part of the Greater Beaumont chapter and are doing as much as we can to send students to college and support them. But beyond the resources, money, we provide mentoring support throughout the 4 years or however many years the students in college. But even as importantly, we're excited about the implementation that's ongoing right now as we work through the specifics for putting together a joint project with the Beaumont and Port Arthur Rotary Clubs with the 100 of Greater Beaumont to put together a program for cohort groups of students where they leave 8th grade, they go into 9th grade. We stay with them as mentors, 9th through 12th, provide scholarship at the end of their 4 years, but also where we engage 8th graders for putting together an artistic design of some sort in response to the Amanda Gorman poem that she delivered at the presidential inauguration. And essentially, kind of in follow-up to the George Floyd situation, we decided let's have communication within and across neighborhoods, host town hall meetings, to have conversations that often we talk about but don't often follow up on, to have conversations to prevent problems from happening in the first place. We're really excited about all that.
Well, thank you. I'm, of course, from the Savannah chapter, and we're doing all of the things that you all are doing, and a strong mentoring program, and also a Saturday program where we bring in top speakers to talk about various issues that could help these students make it in colleges and universities. Let me say a big thank you to each of you. You brought a great deal of information to this platform, and I hope that folk will go to the website of the 100 and get copies of the white papers and share them. We had no pride of authorship. We want you to take it. We want you to share it. We want all the chapters. We want AFT to have copies. Please, please, please go and get copies of the white papers and share them. We want to also thank our chairman, Chairman Deutsch. Tommy Deutsch has done a great job in terms of giving us these platforms to share this information with you. Also, the staff, Dr. McNeely, you have been awesome. We thank you, thank you, thank you. The panelists, you've been awesome. I know each of you personally, and I thank you, thank you, thank you for your time, your effort, and the great expertise that you have. We also want to thank Dr. Brown for bringing AFT to the table. We're looking forward to having a great relationship with AFT going forward. Your concerns are our concerns. And most importantly, we want to thank the audience for tuning in this evening to take advantage of this wealth of opportunity and this wealth of knowledge. So ladies and gentlemen, it is exactly 8 o'clock, and that's what we promised we would stop. So good night, everybody. Have sweet dreams, and make sure your students are ready to go to college. Thank you very much.